Hello, I'd like to welcome you all today to the Israel Asia Center's briefing on the Israel-Hamas war. My name is Rebecca Zeffert, and I'm the founder and executive director of the Israel Asia Center. The Israel Asia Center is an independent, not-for-profit organization based in Jerusalem, focused on bridging the knowledge and network gaps between Israel and countries in East, South, and Southeast Asia through programs that inform, connect, and empower the Israel-Asia leaders of today and tomorrow. Today's session is part of a series of briefings we've been running for our networks in Asia on the current situation in Israel and the war with Hamas. And I'd like to welcome today's guest speaker, Ambassador Mark Regev. Ambassador Mark Regev is Senior Advisor to the Prime Minister of Israel and chair of the Abba Eban Institute for Diplomacy at Reichman University. Prior to these roles, he was Israel's ambassador to the UK, advisor to the Prime Minister on international communications and public affairs, and spokesperson for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the State of Israel. Previous diplomatic posts he's held also include Vice Consul in Hong Kong, First Secretary in Beijing, and counselor in Washington, D.C. Ambassador Regev holds a BA in Political Science and Modern History from the University of Melbourne and an MA in Political Science from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, as well as an MSc in Management from Boston University. So we're going to open right up to questions. Ambassador Regev, Israel is renowned for having a strong intelligence. How are you surprised on, how come you were surprised on October 7th by the attacks?
Well, thank you for having me. I thank the Israel Asia Center for hosting this event. And it's a pleasure to me to speak to people throughout Asia. You ask a very good question. How is it that Israel was surprised on October 7th? How did Hamas succeed in catching us off guard? And there was a series of Israeli failures on that day. First of all, as you rightly point out, there was the intelligence failure, that we were not expecting the attack. And when it came, we were caught off guard. And we paid a heavy price in blood for that failure. 1,200 people murdered in a space of a few hours, and some 240 people taken hostages into Gaza. And the scope of the bloodshed was particularly horrific for Israelis. I mean, we had entire families, civilians, shot by Hamas terrorists. They came into villages, farming villages, and they opened up automatic fire, and they massacred communities. We saw parents being killed in front of their children and children being killed in front of their parents. We saw beheadings. We saw people burned to death. We saw terrible acts of rape and then murder. There were young people at an open-air music festival, and they were just gunned down in a ravine with automatic fire. Terrible massacre. And we really saw terrible, brutal violence against our people, and we weren't prepared for it. And so there was the original failure not to have a warning of the attack ahead of time. And once the attack happened, we have other questions. Why is it that the terrorists succeeded in storming into Israel from their point of view, so successfully? How did they cross the frontier, which is supposed to be a guarded and protected frontier? And once they were on our side of the frontier and they were butchering our people, our civilian population, how is it that it took so long to clean out the territory, to remove the terrorist threat? And so all these questions need to be addressed because they're good questions. And I think ultimately, though, Israel is strong, and we are strong enough to admit when there are failures, and we have to deal with these failures, and we have to learn our lessons. You know, in the past, 50 years ago this year was the 1973 Yom Kippur War. And then, like in October 7th, Israel was taken by surprise. And when the war was over and we won it, we had a whole public inquiry headed by a state commission of inquiry, led by a Supreme Court justice and with former military chiefs of staff in the commission. And they made a thorough investigation, and there were a whole series of military officers and others who paid for the mistakes. And it also had political ramifications. In many ways, Golda Meir's resignation in 1974 is due to the Yom Kippur War. So I don't know what will happen this time, but I can be assured that Israel will look into all the failures. We will do so objectively, and I think lessons will be learned.
Thank you. I'm going to open up to questions in order for us to manage the incoming and answered questions from the audience. Please post your questions in the question section, not the chat. If you wish us to cite your name or organization or news organization, please type it ahead of your question. And due to the sensitivity of Israel-Indonesia relations, we won't mention the names of participants posing questions from Indonesia unless you ask us to. So we received some questions here with regards to the hostage situation. There's a question from Dan Williams at Reuters asking, where do things stand on the hostage negotiation? And also from Manish Jha from TV9 India, what is the condition of the hostages? Has the Red Cross been helpful? And also from Satarupa Bhattacharya from Indo-Asian News Service in India, asking if there's been any proof of life received on the 220 hostages.
So there's more than 220. I think the number we're using today, after finding 2 dead hostages recently, I think we're talking about 237 hostages. Of them, there are a group of elderly people, people over the age of 75, and there's also a group of children, people under the age of 18. I think there are 32 children. And now of the children, there are babies. There's a 10-month-old baby. He was 9 months when he was taken hostage, but he became a hostage before he could walk or talk. And I think this shows us the sort of barbarians that Hamas is, what sort of people take a baby hostage. There are also infants who've been taken hostage, 3-year-olds, 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds. Once again, the question must be asked, what sort of barbarians kidnap babies and infants? This is contrary to the belief of all the 3 major monotheistic religions. What is this sort of barbarianism? And there is surely no justification ever for this sort of behavior. The journalist from India asked me about the Red Cross. So usually in these sort of situations, you can have a Red Cross visit, and the Red Cross has asked to visit the hostages, but Hamas has refused to do so. And we have had no sign of life from the Red Cross. We have no direct knowledge through the Red Cross. Are these people, what is their situation? Are they injured? Are they alive? Are they dead? In other words, we have intelligence information, which we have collected ourselves, which I cannot share with you. I apologize. But the Red Cross, unfortunately, has been unable to visit a single hostage in captivity. And that is a serious, serious problem. And Hamas must be condemned for this. And I think every day, people of goodwill across the world have to demand of the Red Cross to continue to demand of Hamas that we visit, the hostages being held must be visited. Of course, they must be freed. They should be, according to the international law, they must be freed unequivocally and immediately, unconditionally. But Hamas is not going to let that happen. And I presume we know why. We saw the brutality that Hamas was capable of on October 7th, when they butchered innocent civilians, including children. We have no doubt that they're not suddenly going to become humanitarians and observe international law and release the hostages. That's not going to happen. So there are talks behind the scenes to achieve a hostage release. you know, if I said we're 50% of the way there or 60% of the way there or 80% of the way there, it's immaterial because you're not there until you're there. What I can tell you is that Hamas is under very, very strong military pressure. They have been on the receiving end of the military might of the IDF now for a few weeks. And we have destroyed many of their military positions. We have taken out many of their senior commanders. And Hamas is feeling the blows of Israel. And now we have stated that we will only agree to a temporary ceasefire if our people are released. And so maybe now we are closer to a release of the hostages because Hamas is desperate for some sort of ceasefire, even a temporary one. And maybe this gives us a certain optimism, a certain hope, a certain amount of hope that for that limited ceasefire, Hamas will be willing to release our people. But once again, we're not there yet. I have nothing to announce at this stage. I hope it happens, but I can't be sure it will happen.
Thank you. There's a question here from Sudhi Ranjan Sen from Bloomberg News in India, asking if you could please give us an understanding on Iran's role and involvement in the conflict.
So when countries across the globe, including India, condemned in unequivocal language Hamas's terrible massacre of Israeli civilians on October 7th, and you know, from Delhi to Washington, from Paris to Tokyo, all civilized countries stood up and condemned the attack perpetrated by Hamas against civilians. It was the single largest attack of terrorists since 9/11, since September 2001, and it was the single largest act of anti-Semitic violence since the Holocaust, since the terrible years for the Jewish people in the Second World War. And there was unanimity across the planet, almost unanimity, I should say, in condemnation and in standing with Israel. But not in Tehran, not in Iran. There, the massacres perpetrated by Hamas were applauded. They were celebrated. And you see in the Middle East today, two rival blocs. There is the axis of terror headed by Iran. And that axis includes Hamas in Gaza, includes Hezbollah in Lebanon, includes the Houthis in Yemen, includes certain militias in Syria and in Iraq. And on the other side, you have Israel and the moderate, pragmatic Arab states in the Gulf, in North Africa, and so forth. And what we've seen over the last few years is we've seen the process of historical reconciliation between Israel and the Arab world move into high gear. In 2020, we saw the Abraham Accords, we saw breakthrough agreements with Morocco, with Bahrain, with the United Arab Emirates. And over the last few months, we've had increased talk of a breakthrough in the relationship between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And while most countries, India, Japan, European countries, Canada, the United States, all celebrate the growth of Middle East peace, the strengthening of cooperation in the region, while that is celebrated across the world, for Iran, for Hamas, for Hezbollah, peace in the Middle East is an existential threat. They don't believe in peace. They don't believe in reconciliation. They are the most fierce enemies of peace. And I'm hopeful that when this war is over and Hamas will have been defeated, decisively defeated, that will be a blow against the entire axis of terror. And we will see space created by the elimination of Hamas, which is a vicious enemy of any sort of peace or reconciliation. We'll see space created for more moderate voices, more pragmatic voices, and we will see peace energized. And I don't exclude the possibility when this is over that we will see Saudi-Israeli relations also move in a positive direction.
that note, a question from Ashwin Ahmad from Strat News Global in India. What future does Israel see for Gaza once it completes its operation? And can Arab states be persuaded to play a role here?
Well, first of all, I'll answer that question in a second, but because another question on India on this topic, we remember just recently in India, you hosted the G20 summit, at which President Biden, together with Prime Minister Modi, you announced this special corridor from India through to the Persian Gulf, the Arab Gulf, through to the Middle East, through to Israel, and then through Europe, creating a corridor of cooperation, of trade, of prosperity. And most people say this is a wonderful idea. We're serving India's interest, we're serving the interests of the Arab countries, we're serving Israel's interests, we're serving European interests, a corridor of trade and progress that brings India through the Middle East closer to Europe. And while, as I say, people celebrate this, unfortunately for Iran, for Hezbollah and Hamas, that sort of cooperation is terrible. And it just shows who we're dealing with. Now, to answer your question, when this is over, when Hamas has been defeated, and they will be defeated, there will be a new situation in Gaza. Gaza without Hamas. And what Israel's policy is the following. We don't want to occupy Gaza. We don't want to rule over Gaza. But we insist, however, that Gaza be demilitarized and de-radicalized. And if I can use a metaphor from the Second World War, when Nazi Germany was defeated by the Allies, there was a policy to demilitarize and de-radicalize, denazify, it was said at the time. And that's what we need in Gaza. We need a demilitarized Gaza. We need a de-radicalized Gaza, a Gaza that will live in peace with its neighbors, a Gaza which will have a government, a Palestinian government, that will worry about the people of Gaza and work on their well-being, on their prosperity, on their social services, and not this terrible terrorist regime that you have at the moment. Look, Hamas has been in power in Gaza for 16 years. And what do they have to show for it? What has Hamas bought the people of Gaza? Bloodshed, misery, and impoverishment. And the truth is, when Hamas is defeated, and they will be defeated, that will ultimately be better off, not only for the people of Israel, who will not have to live next to this radical, crazy terrorist enclave, but it's ultimately good for the people of Gaza, who deserve better than this terrorist regime that has been ruling them for 16 years and doesn't give a hoot about the well-being of the people of Gaza.
So on this issue of de-radicalization, one of our participants from Indonesia has asked, how long do you think it will take to de-radicalize the younger generation in Gaza?
So I think it's not an immediate process, but I think it does not necessarily have to take years. And I'll explain why. Because when this is over, the people of Gaza will look at what extremism brought them. The people of Gaza will see what Hamas brought them. The pain, the suffering, the war. It's clear to everyone that Hamas started this war. And so I think that Hamas legacy will be rejected by people across Gaza, and especially the young people. And they will say, look where this extremism has brought us. It is nothing but a dead end. And maybe the path of moderation, the path of cooperation, the path of pragmatism is the path that builds a better future.
Thank you. Can you talk to us a little bit about the situation in northern Israel along the border with Lebanon?
So we've evacuated many of the civilian communities along the border with Lebanon because Hezbollah has been attacking our communities there in the north out of, I don't know, some sort of a strange solidarity with Hamas in Gaza. But maybe we shouldn't be surprised because Hamas and Hezbollah are twin sisters. They are like each other in that they are both proxies of the Iranians and that they are both committed to this very sort of radical extremist agenda. So far, the fighting has been contained more or less to the border areas. But if Hezbollah does escalate, if Hezbollah does create an all-out war, I want to say the following, and they need to know this. Hamas took us by surprise on October 7th, and we paid dearly in blood for being taken by surprise. But we won't be taken by surprise in the north. Our military is mobilized. We are following events very, very closely. We have our eye on the ball. And if Hezbollah seeks an escalation, they will find an expeditious and decisive Israeli response. Now, we don't want a two-front war. We prefer to be able to concentrate totally on the battle against Hamas in Gaza. But if we are forced to fight a two-front war, we will win and win decisively. We did so in 1967. We did so in 1973. We can do so again. And who will suffer from such a mistake if Hezbollah decides to escalate? The people of Lebanon. And the bottom line is this, the people of Lebanon should look at what's going on in Gaza today, and they should ask themselves, is it smart, is it sensible to start a war with Israel? Because we will act very forcibly to defend our people. And we urge Hezbollah, think very carefully before you start an all-out war.
So you talked to some extent before about some of the peace agreements with other Arab countries in the region. There are two questions that have come in on that. One from Nilantha Ilangamua from the Sri Lanka Guardian, asking, how will the ongoing operations impact the normalization of relations with other Arab countries, presumably in this case Saudi Arabia? And then also a question from a researcher at a think tank in Indonesia asking, how will the normalization process between Israel and Southeast Asian countries continue despite the current constraints? And I assume in this case they're talking about Indonesia.
So the two questions are interrelated, of course. But without going into our conversations with different Arab governments, I want to tell this audience unequivocally that there is a difference between the public message that is coming from Arab capitals and the message that we are hearing and some of our allies and friends are hearing. Hamas has no friends in the Arab world. Maybe Qatar is the singular exception. But across the Gulf and in North Africa, Hamas has no friends. They are seen for what they are. An extremist organization, a radical organization, a terrorist organization. And when Israel defeats Hamas, as we will, no one in Arab capitals will cry, maybe except for Qatar, who have a relationship with Hamas. But across the Arab world, I think there is a great understanding of what Hamas is. And I believe, and it was in a previous question as well, when this is over, I think there will be international partners and Arab partners too, who will want to play a part in rebuilding a new Gaza for the betterment of the Gazan Palestinians. They deserve better. And there will be an effort, and Israel will help facilitate that effort. And I'm sure there will be important Arab countries that will be part of rebuilding a new Gaza for the benefit of the people of Gaza. Now, as to the questions of Israel's relations with countries in Southeast Asia who have yet to have diplomatic relations with Israel, I thought after the Abraham Accords, Morocco made peace with Israel, Bahrain made peace with Israel, the UAE made peace with Israel. We have normalized our ties with all three countries, and that includes Jordan, that includes previously Egypt, of course. Those two have had relations with Israel for much longer. Why do countries in Southeast Asia have to be more Arab than the Arabs? Yes, why do they have to be more extreme? I've been told in conversations that I've had with people from Southeast Asia, they say, well, if Saudi Arabia normalizes ties with Israel, this will be for us a signal that we can too. Okay, so I accept that. If that's what people are telling me, I listen and I pay attention. And so we will focus now, when this war is over, on seeing what can be done to try to normalize ties with Saudi Arabia. I think it's possible. I think there's a unique convergence of interests between the United States, Israel, and Saudi Arabia. I think it's possible. And then I hope that people in Southeast Asia who say, well, once Saudi Arabia does it, we will do it too, they will follow through on what they have said.
We have just about a minute left before you have to leave. Are there any closing remarks you'd like to make?
I think it's important to understand this war in Gaza in the strategic and larger situation, because ultimately, our fight against Hamas, I don't think, is just Israel's fight. I said in my remarks before that Hamas represents this axis of terror who want to turn the Middle East back into some sort of dark age of confrontation and of destruction. There's a larger group of countries that want to see the Middle East move forward to cooperation and prosperity. And so my message to you all is that Israel's victory over Hamas is not just Israel's victory. It's ultimately a victory for the people of Gaza, who will get a government that will be a bit more concerned about their well-being. But it's also a victory for the Middle East, and it's a victory for everyone who wants to see peace in the Middle East. And it's a victory over extremism. It's a victory for moderation. It's a victory for civilization over people who committed the most terrible crimes against humanity. And just as the defeat of ISIS in Syria and in Iraq served the interests of the entire Middle East, I believe the victory of Israel over Gaza will serve regional and global interests. I thank you all for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Regev, for joining us today. And thank you also to our audience who joined us from India, Indonesia, Singapore, China, Japan, Sri Lanka, and Australia. And for those of you joining today from Indonesia, we welcome you to apply to our Israel-Indonesia Futures Program. The deadline for applications is next week, November 27th. And for more information about this and the Israel Asia Center, please visit our website at www.israelasiacenter.org. Thank you very much. Good day and good evening. Thank you.